More than 4,600 Barbies have been left at safe havens in this country, but this story begins with one left in the dead of winter, not at a hospital, but on the stone steps of a church. 2 decades later, a broken woman returned to that same church, seeking shelter from her own desperate storm. She had no idea the young pastor who opened the door was the living consequence of her most agonizing secret. Her name was Elena. She was 17, alone, and hiding a pregnancy from the world. That winter night, she made a choice protected by law but haunted by conscience. She used a state's safe haven provision, leaving her newborn where he would be found, warm and alive. But for 22 years, she carried the weight of that decision, a ghost of a child she never knew, until the day her own desperate need led her back to the very doors where she had left him. The law called it a safe surrender. For Elena, it felt like a murder of her own soul. She walked away from the stone steps that night believing she had given her son his only chance at life, while condemning herself to a shadow existence. She was a high school junior from a strict, religious home where an unplanned pregnancy was the ultimate sin. The father was a boy who vanished the moment she told him. She hid her swelling body under baggy sweatshirts through the fall, delivering alone in a friend's bathroom on a freezing December night. The safe haven law was her desperate lighthouse. She wrapped him in her only clean towel, placed him carefully in a donated cardboard bassinet just inside the church's covered doorway where the frost couldn't bite, and rang the bell before fleeing into the dark. She believed it was an act of love, but the ghost of that choice never left her. For the baby, the system worked as designed. An overnight custodian found him within minutes. Police and social services were called. He was warm, healthy, and protected by the anonymous surrender provision. He entered the foster system with a case number, not a name. He was adopted within 4 months by a kind, middle-aged couple who could not have children of their own. They named him Daniel. They gave him a stable home in a quiet suburb, filled with books and a deep, practicing faith. They told him from his earliest memory that he was chosen, loved, and that his birth mother had made a brave decision so he could have a good life. He believed them. He never felt abandoned. He felt destined. But on the other side of that equation, Elena unraveled. She finished high school in a daze, moved through a series of waitressing jobs and dead-end relationships. The guilt was a constant anchor. She developed a pattern of self-sabotage, pushing away good things because she felt she didn't deserve them. She married briefly, disastrously, and found herself divorced by 25 with nothing to show for it. She drifted from town to town, a classic case of what psychologists call chronic disenfranchised grief. The trauma of the relinquishment was a silent, festering wound never addressed because there was no grave to visit, no name to mourn. She was haunted by questions with no answers. Was he alive? Was he happy? Did he hate her? Meanwhile, Daniel grew. He was a quiet, thoughtful boy, drawn to the stories of compassion and redemption in the Bible his parents read to him. In his teen years, he felt a specific, growing call toward ministry, a desire to help people in their darkest hours. He attended a small Christian college, then seminary. He spoke often in his youth group about the concept of grace, unearned, unconditional love. He believed in it intellectually, preached it passionately. But there was a silent, personal mystery at the core of his identity, a biological mother he knew nothing about. It wasn't a burning need, more a quiet curiosity, a missing piece of his own origin story he had learned to live without. Elena's life, however, continued its downward trajectory. In her late 30s, a bad car accident left her with chronic pain and an opioid prescription. The medication became a crutch, then a cage. She lost her apartment, her job, and what little family connection she had left. The winter she turned 40, she was sleeping in her broken-down car, using her last few dollars for food, utterly defeated. In her deepest despair, a fragmented memory surfaced, not of the baby, but of the place. The stone archway, the warm light from the stained glass windows spilling onto snow. The feeling, however desperate, that it was a place of sanctuary. With nowhere else to turn, she aimed her dying car toward the only landmark from her past that had ever represented hope. Daniel, now Reverend Daniel Foster, had been serving at that very church, St. Stephen's, for just over a year. It was his first posting out of seminary. The older congregation loved his earnest energy, his modern sermons rooted in ancient kindness. He had initiated a community outreach program for the homeless, a controversial move for some parishioners, but he was adamant. The church must be a refuge, he insisted. He often thought of his own unknown beginning, of the safe haven that had literally saved his life. He never imagined that the very law that protected him as an infant would one day guide his ministry, or that it would bring his past to his doorstep. On a grey Tuesday afternoon in February, with a sleety rain beginning to fall, Elena stood shivering on the familiar steps. She looked 20 years older than she was. Her hair, once dark and thick, was streaked with harsh grey. Her coat was threadbare. She had come to beg for help from the church's charity fund, maybe a night in a shelter. She had no plan, no hope, just a reflexive crawl toward the last place she remembered light. She pulled the heavy oak door open and stepped into the vestibule. The smell of old wood and wax brought a visceral, dizzying rush of memory. She leaned against the wall, trembling. Daniel was in his small office off the main hall, reviewing the budget for the warming center. He heard the outer door creak open and close. It was a common sound, parishioners stopping by, people in need coming for the food pantry. He stood up, smoothing his simple black shirt, and walked out to greet the visitor. He saw a woman, hunched and wet, looking lost in the dim light. His heart, trained for compassion, went out to her immediately. He approached with a gentle smile, his hand extended slightly in a gesture of welcome. "Hello," he said, his voice calm and warm, the practiced tone of a pastor meeting a new soul in crisis. "I'm Daniel, can I help you?" Elena looked up. The words died in her throat. She saw the young man's face, the shape of his eyes, the set of his jaw. It was like looking into a ghostly mirror, a reflection of her own father and of the infant features she had seared into her memory a lifetime ago. A violent, impossible recognition short-circuited her mind. The air left her lungs. The world narrowed to the kind, unknowing eyes of the man in the clerical collar. Daniel saw her shock, but he misinterpreted it. He saw a woman overcome by hardship, maybe intimidated by the church. He took a softer step forward. "It's okay," he said. "You're safe here. What's your name?" Elena tried to speak. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. Her mind was screaming a name she had never spoken aloud, the secret name she had whispered to her son in the minutes she held him before leaving him on these very stones. Her eyes filled with tears she could not control, spilling over onto her weathered cheeks. She wasn't seeing a pastor. She was seeing the living, breathing answer to every tortured question of her life, standing in the one place she thought she might find mercy. And he had no idea who she was. Daniel saw the tears and felt a surge of pastoral duty. "Let's get you out of the cold," he said, gently gesturing toward his office. "We can talk, we have resources, you don't have to face this alone." But as he spoke, a flicker of something strange passed through him, a feeling of profound, eerie familiarity. He dismissed it as empathy, the emotional resonance of meeting someone in deep pain. He had no framework, no conceivable clue that the woman falling apart before him was the architect of his life's first chapter. He was about to invite his own mother, a shattered stranger, into the sanctuary of his church and into the center of a storm neither of them saw coming. He led her to a small, quiet room, offering a chair and a cup of water. Elena sat, her body rigid, her eyes never leaving his face. Every detail confirmed the impossible, the slight cowlick in his dark hair, just like her father's, the way he held his head when he listened. She was staring at a living photograph from a past she had tried to bury. Daniel took the seat opposite her, his expression one of gentle concern. "Take your time," he said softly. "Just tell me what brings you here today. What do you need?" Elena's mind was a screaming void. She couldn't say what she needed. She needed to turn back time. She needed forgiveness that couldn't exist. She needed to tell him everything and nothing all at once. The words that finally stumbled out were a mask, a desperate lie clinging to the edges of truth. I have nowhere to go. My car, it's gone. I have nothing." It was all true, but it was the smallest fragment of the earthquake happening inside her. Daniel nodded, pulling a notepad closer. "Okay, we can help with that. Our community partnership can get you a motel voucher for a few nights while we connect you with more permanent housing services. What's your name for the form?" The question was a landmine. Giving her real name felt like detonating the fragile world between them, but a fake name felt like a deeper betrayal. She swallowed, her throat tight. Elena Flores. He wrote it down. "Elena, a beautiful name. I'm Daniel, as I said, Daniel Foster." He said his full name with a casual warmth, a man comfortable in his own skin, in his own story. To him, it was an introduction. To her, it was a verdict, foster asterisk. The word screamed at her. He had been fostered, adopted, given a new name, a new life because of her. She managed a shaky nod, looking down at her worn hands to break the unbearable eye contact. "Thank you, Pastor Daniel." As he filled out the basic intake form, asking about her last address, any income, any family to contact, Elena gave clipped, minimal answers. Every question was a knife twist. Family? None. Last stable address? Months ago. Medical issues? She gestured vaguely, mentioning the old pain from her accident. Daniel's kindness was a torture. He was the embodiment of the grace she had spent 22 years believing she could never deserve. "Elena, look at me," Daniel said gently, putting his pen down. She forced her gaze up. "You're safe here. This isn't an interrogation. We are here to help, not judge. But I have to ask, are you in any immediate danger? Is there someone? Are you fleeing from someone?" The profound irony of the question almost made her laugh, a hysterical sound she choked back into a sob. She was asterisk in danger, from the truth sitting 3 feet away, from the past that had just walked into the room. "No," she whispered, "I'm just lost." Daniel leaned forward, his pastor's instinct sensing a deeper wound. Sometimes being lost isn't about geography, it's about spirit. This church, it's a place for the lost to be found. You came to the right door. Elena felt the walls closing in. His words, meant as comfort, were arrows. The right door. This was the exact door. She wanted to scream it. Instead, a tear tracked a clean line through the grime on her cheek. "This church," she began, her voice barely audible. Has it always been here? I mean, a long time." Daniel smiled, glad to steer toward a neutral topic. "Oh yes, St. Stephen's was built in 1904. It's a landmark. My parents actually brought me here as a child sometimes before we moved to the suburbs. There's a beautiful piece to these old stones, don't you think?" "My parents," the words were a physical blow. She knew he meant his adoptive parents, but to hear him claim them so easily, to have a childhood memory in this very building that didn't include her, it was the confirmation of her greatest fear. She had been erased. She was a ghost in his history. The administrative part done, Daniel stood. "Let me get you that voucher from the safe. I'll also put together a bag from our food pantry. You wait here, rest." The moment he left the room, Elena fell apart. Silent, heaving sobs shook her frame. She pressed a fist to her mouth to stifle the sound. What was she doing? She had to leave. She couldn't sit here accepting charity from her own son, living a lie. But her body was weak, her spirit broken. She had nowhere else to crawl. The cruel poetry of it was devastating. The safe haven that had received her infant was now the only refuge for the wreck she had become. Daniel returned a few minutes later with an envelope and a reusable grocery bag filled with canned goods, bread, and fruit. He also carried a simple wooden cross on a leather cord. "This is from our prayer ministry," he said, offering it. "A reminder you're not alone." Elena took the cross, the leather cool in her hand. It felt like a sacrament she was unworthy to touch. As she reached for it, the sleeve of her worn coat rode up slightly, revealing a faint, faded scar on her inner wrist, a small, raised line about an inch long. Daniel's eyes caught it. It was an old scar, nothing remarkable among people who had lived hard lives, but something about it, a strange, dormant memory flickered. He had a scar in the exact same place. A childhood curiosity he'd asked his mother about. She told him he was born with a tiny benign skin tag that was removed when he was a baby at the hospital. A common, simple story he'd never questioned. He blinked, pushing the odd coincidence aside. "Let me walk you out. The motel is just a few blocks down Maple." Elena numbly gathered the bag and envelope. As they walked back through the quiet church, she felt the weight of the stone walls, the smell of hymnals and wood polish, the echo of their footsteps on the hardwood floor. She was walking through a museum of her own personal catastrophe. At the main doors, Daniel paused. "The voucher is for 3 nights. Please come back tomorrow. We have a hot lunch program, and I'd like to see how you're doing. Sometimes talking helps more than food or shelter." Elena could only nod, desperate to escape. She stepped out into the sleet, the cold a shock after the church's warmth. She didn't look back. She walked down the steps, each one feeling like a step away from a precipice she had already fallen over. Daniel watched her go, a frown of deep pastoral concern on his face. Her profound, wordless grief had affected him more than most encounters. There was a depth to her pain that felt ancestral. As he turned to go back inside, his foot brushed against something small and white on the floor near where she had been sitting. He bent down and picked it up. It was a weathered, folded piece of paper, soft at the creases from age. It must have fallen from her pocket. He hesitated, knowing he should respect her privacy, but if it was important, an ID or something she needed, he had to return it. Gently, he unfolded it. It was not an ID, it was a birth certificate, a photocopy faded and handled countless times. The name at the top was clear, Baby Boy Flores, date of birth, December 17th, 22 years ago, place of birth not listed. Under mother, it read Elena Maria Flores, age 17 asterisk. The father's line was blank, but it was the stamp at the bottom that made Daniel's breath catch. It was a county seal, and across it, in bold official font, were the words, Safe Haven Relinquishment, Case #71483 asterisk. Daniel's knees felt weak. He leaned against the cold stone wall of the vestibule. The date, the mother's name, the Safe Haven stamp. His own birthday was December 17th. He was a Safe Haven baby. He knew his case number by heart, a fact he'd learned when he'd briefly considered searching for medical history as a teen. His case number was 71483. The world tilted. The woman, Elena, her shock, her tears, her inability to look at him, the scar, her asterisk scar, it wasn't a coincidence. It was a birthmark, a matching birthmark. The paper trembled in his hand. The theological framework of his life, the narrative of being chosen, of a brave, selfless decision by an anonymous woman, slammed into the visceral human reality of a broken, agging woman in a worn coat. The abstract concept of a birth mother collided with the specific, suffering person he had just tried to comfort. His mind raced, rejecting the connection even as the evidence assembled into an undeniable truth. It couldn't be. The statistics were astronomical against it. Safe Haven Barbies were adopted, they moved on, they built lives. Birth mothers rarely, if ever, returned. And they certainly didn't return to the exact location 2 decades later to meet the child they surrendered. It was a 1-in-a-million tragedy, a divine paradox. But Daniel was a man of faith, and in that moment, a terrible, awful verse echoed in his mind. You have searched me, Lord, and you know me. The pieces were too perfect, too devastatingly aligned to be random. This was either a cruel trick of fate or a profound, terrifying act of providence. He looked out the door, but Elena was gone, swallowed by the grey afternoon. He had her first name, but no way to find her if she didn't return. He had her motel voucher, but the front desk wouldn't give out her room number. He was holding the brittle, paper proof of his own origin in one hand and a crushing, pastoral dilemma in the other. Should he try to find her, confront her with this, or was the kindest, most pastoral thing to let her disappear, to preserve the fragile peace of both their lives? The pastor in him screamed to protect her privacy, to honor the sacred anonymity the Safe Haven law was built upon. The son in him, the little boy who had sometimes wondered about the face behind the word, mother, felt a pull so powerful it threatened his very identity. He walked slowly back to his office, the photocopy feeling like a live wire in his hand. He placed it carefully on his desk, staring at it as if it might transform. His eyes fell on the notepad where he had written her name just minutes before, Elena Flores. He had written it in his own looping script, a name now charged with impossible meaning. He had to know, he had to be sure. With a shaking hand, he opened his desk drawer and pulled out his own personal file, the one containing his adoption papers, his old case summaries. He found the sheet with the county seal. He laid it next to the photocopy Elena had dropped. The case numbers matched, digit for digit. Daniel Foster, the pastor, sat down heavily. The man who preached certainty, who offered guidance, was utterly lost. The foundation of his life story had just cracked open, revealing a chasm of pain and complexity he was not prepared to navigate. And the woman at the center of it all was out there in the cold, alone, carrying a secret he now shared. He had promised her safety. But he had no idea how to keep that promise when the greatest threat to her peace Was the truth now sitting on his desk, and the terrifying, inevitable conversation that would have to follow? For hours, Daniel sat paralyzed in the silent church. The pastor and the son within him were at war. One demanded he protect a vulnerable woman's privacy and peace at all costs. The other, a voice he'd quieted for decades, wept and screamed to know the woman who gave him life. The ethical guidelines were clear. As a pastor, he was a mandated reporter for imminent harm, but this was a historical, legal relinquishment. His duty was to client confidentiality, even an informal one. The safe haven law itself was built on a promise of permanent, protected anonymity. To breach that now, to confront her, felt like a profound violation of the very social contract that had saved him. But he was no longer just a pastor. He was a principal in the story. The document on his desk wasn't a parishioner's confession, it was his own birth certificate. The psychological weight was immense. Adoption experts note that even in the happiest adoptions, the search for biological origins is a fundamental human question tied to identity, genetics, and a sense of wholeness. Daniel had boxed that question away neatly, labeling it answered by the narrative of brave, anonymous love. Now the box had exploded, and the abstract birth mother had a name, a face etched with suffering, and was sleeping in a budget motel 3 blocks away. He knew what the textbooks said about reunions. They could be beautiful, traumatic, destabilizing, or all three. For the adoptee, there was often a flood of new identity information. For the birth parent, especially one who relinquished under crisis, it could trigger a tsunami of repressed grief and shame. The potential for emotional mismatch was high, one party hopping for family, the other too broken to offer it. Daniel's mind, trained in counseling, raced through the worst-case scenarios. What if his presence, his very existence, was a trigger that pushed her over an edge? What if she rejected him? What if she demanded a relationship he wasn't ready to give? But beneath the fear, a more terrifying question arose. What was his Christian duty here? Was it to preserve a comfortable life for both of them? Or was it to step into the painful, messy truth, believing that grace could grow in even the most scarred soil? His entire ministry was based on the latter principle. He couldn't preach redemption and then hide from its most personal, complicated application. As dusk fell, he knew he couldn't carry this alone. He needed wisdom from the two people whose love had been his anchor. With a trembling hand, he picked up his phone and called his parents, Joan and Mark Foster. Their evening was quiet, a routine of dinner and the news. His mother answered on the second ring, her voice warm. "Danny, everything all right at the church?" Daniel's throat tightened. "Mom, Dad, I need to talk to you about something huge, and I need you to just listen first." He heard the concern instantly. "Of course, sweetheart, we're here, your father's on the speaker." Daniel took a deep, shaky breath. He started from the beginning, the woman coming in for help, her profound distress, his feeling of odd familiarity, then finding the paper. He read them, the names, the dates, the case number. The silence on the other end of the line was absolute, heavier than any sound. It was his father who spoke first, his voice uncharacteristically rough. "Daniel, are you sure? The case number matches exactly." "I have the papers side by side, Dad. It's her, Elena Flores. She's the one." His mother, Joan, began to cry softly, not tears of anger or betrayal, but of overwhelming, complex sorrow. "Oh, that poor woman," she whispered. "All these years, and she comes back to that asterisk place. She must be in agony." Their reaction was a testament to their character. There was no possessiveness, no fear of being replaced. Their immediate concern was for the woman who had given them their son. Joan, through her tears, asked the most important question. "What does she need, Danny, right now, tonight?" Daniel broke then, tears finally spilling over. "I don't know, Mom. I gave her a food bag and a motel voucher. She looked destroyed. She looked at me like she was seeing a ghost, and I had no idea. I was just the pastor on duty." Mark's voice was steady, anchoring. "Son, listen to me. You are our son. Nothing changes that. Not a piece of paper, not a DNA match, nothing. But you have a unique responsibility now. You're not just her son, you're her pastor. She came to you for sanctuary in every sense of the word. You have to be both, and that might be the hardest thing you ever do." They talked for over an hour, his parents offering unwavering support but no easy answers. They encouraged him to pray, to seek supervision from a senior clergy mentor, but ultimately they trusted his heart. "You have a good heart, Daniel," Joan said. "Let it lead you, but protect hers too." Hanging up, Daniel felt a fraction of the weight lift. He had a foundation, but the monumental task remained. He couldn't let her disappear into the night, not knowing that he knew. That felt like a second abandonment. He decided he would go to the motel in the morning, not to demand anything, but to offer a simple, quiet acknowledgement, to give her the power in whatever happened next. Across town, in a dim, musty motel room, Elena stared at the ceiling. The cross Daniel had given her lay on the cheap nightstand. The 3-night voucher felt like a death sentence. How could she stay here, in this town, so close to him? Every rational thought told her to run, to take the bus at dawn to anywhere else, to let him keep his good, clean life untainted by her wreckage. But a deeper, more wounded part was rooted to the spot. She had seen him, her son. He was kind, he was good. He had her father's eyes, and she now realized with a piercing ache her own mother's gentle hands. For 22 years her imagination had conjured a ghost. Now she had a living, breathing memory. To run now would be to lose him twice. The temptation to just be near him, even as an anonymous stranger receiving charity, was a powerful, guilty pull. She was trapped between the instinct to flee and the desperate hunger to stay. She had no script for this. The safe haven law had a manual for surrendering an infant. There was no manual for meeting the man he became, especially when you were a beggar at his gate. The next morning, Daniel arrived at the motel just after 9. He felt nauseous, his clerical collar suddenly feeling like a costume. He asked the bored clerk at the front desk for Elena Flores' room. The clerk, recognizing a pastor, gave him the room number without question, a small breach of protocol Daniel noted with a pang of guilt. He stood outside room 107, his heart hammering against his ribs. He raised his hand to knock, then lowered it. He prayed, not for eloquence, but for kindness, for the right words to not cause more damage. Then he knocked. A long minute passed. He heard shuffling inside. The door opened a few inches, held by a security chain. Elena's face appeared in the crack, pale and swollen from a night of crying. When she saw him, her eyes widened in pure panic. She tried to push the door closed. "Elena, wait," Daniel said quickly, his voice soft but urgent. "Please, I'm not here to. I found something you dropped, at the church." He held up the folded photocopy of the birth certificate, making sure she could see it. She froze, her breath catching in a silent gasp. The fight went out of her. Her shoulders slumped. Slowly, with trembling fingers, she undid the chain and opened the door. The room was small and bleak. The bag of food he'd given her sat unopened on the small table. She retreated to sit on the edge of the bed, wrapping her arms around herself, unable to look at him. Daniel stepped inside but didn't sit. He placed the paper carefully on the table. "I didn't look for it," he said softly. "It fell. I picked it up to return it, and then I saw the information." He paused, the next words feeling both monumental and utterly inadequate. "My name is Daniel Foster. My original case number from my adoption file is 71483. Elena made a small, wounded sound, like an animal in a trap. She covered her face with her hands. "I am so sorry," Daniel whispered, the words thick with emotion. "I am so sorry for the pain you've carried all these years." It was the wrong thing. It broke her. A wail tore from her throat, raw and ragged. "Don't you dare be sorry to me," she cried, dropping her hands, her face a mask of anguish. "I left you on a cold step. I walked away. You have nothing to be sorry for." Her guilt was a furious, self-consuming fire, and his compassion felt like gasoline. Daniel took a cautious step closer, then knelt on the worn carpet, putting himself below her eye level, just as he had for so many others in crisis. "Elena," he said, using her name with deliberate care, "the law calls it a safe surrender. You used a law that exists to prevent tragedy. You made sure I was found. You gave me life, and then you gave me a chance. That is not nothing." She shook her head violently. "You don't understand. You had a good family, a good life. I've seen it in you. I ruined mine. I'm a junkie. I'm a failure. I'm everything you shouldn't be near." She was spilling her darkest secrets, weaponizing her shame to push him away, to prove she was unworthy of the connection he was offering. Daniel listened, his own heart breaking. He heard the addiction confession not as a mark of failure, but as a symptom of unbearable pain. "You are not ruined," he said, his voice firm with a conviction that surprised him. "You are a child of God sitting in a hard place, and you are my biological mother. Those two things are both true. I don't have all the answers. I'm scared too, but you are not alone in this room right now." The word mother hung in the air, fragile and immense. Elena stared at him, her sobs subsiding into shaky breaths. For the first time, she held his gaze, searching his face not just for features, but for his soul. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice hollow. "I don't want anything from you," Daniel said honestly. "I want to make sure you're okay. I want to help you if you'll let me, not as a son, but as a pastor. And maybe we can just be two people who share a very big, very painful story. We can figure out the rest later." It was an offer of grace without demands, a space to breathe. Elena, who had expected condemnation or a chaotic emotional claim, was disarmed. She nodded slowly, a fragile, tentative movement. "Okay," she breathed. Daniel stood. "The church has connections with a good rehab clinic. It's a grace-based program. No judgment, just help. Would you let me make a call? You could go today. You wouldn't have to see me. The church would cover it." It was a lifeline thrown not from a son to mother, but from one hurting human to another. Elena, out of strength, out of options, out of hope, grasped it. She nodded again. "Okay." Daniel made the call from his car. By that afternoon, Elena was admitted to the residential facility 30 miles away. She went quietly, carrying only the clothes on her back and the wooden cross he had given her. They did not hug. They did not make promises. They shared one long, silent look that held a universe of pain, history, and a terrifying, tiny seed of possibility. Daniel drove back to the empty church, emotionally spent. He had done the pastoral thing. He had gotten her help, a clean, professional solution, but as he sat in his office, the silence roared. He had just sent his mother away to rehab. The complexity of it was dizzying. He had upheld his duty, but he felt a strange, profound loss. He had touched the truth and then let it go. He didn't know that the story was far from over. The facility required a medical history for admission. And when Elena, in the intake interview, reluctantly listed her chronic pain and her old car accident, a routine check would reveal something she herself had ignored for years, a consequence of her hard life and neglected health. A consequence that would soon pull Daniel back into her world, not as a pastor or a son, but as the only family she had left, forcing a final, irrevocable collision between the past they shared and a frightening future they now faced together. The call from the rehab facility came just 2 weeks later. It was not about a relapse, but about the routine blood work and scans they had run during Elena's admission. The results had revealed a mass in her lung, and a biopsy confirmed the worst, stage 3 small cell carcinoma. The years of stress, the poor nutrition, and the smoking had taken their terminal toll. The doctor's prognosis was blunt. With aggressive treatment, she might have a year. Without it, perhaps 6 months. Elena, newly sober and brutally clear-headed, was given the news in a sterile counseling office. Her first, quiet question was, "Can you call my son? His number is in my file." This time Daniel did not hesitate. He drove to the facility that evening. When he entered the visiting room, Elena looked smaller, but her eyes were clearer than he had ever seen them. She told him the diagnosis without tears, as if she had been waiting for a final punishment and it had finally arrived. "I'm so sorry," she said, not for the cancer, but for the burden it represented. Daniel shook his head, reaching across the table to take her hand. It was the first time they had touched. Her skin was cool and thin. "You don't apologize for this, not to me. We faced this together. Do you understand? Together." It was a vow. In that moment, the pastor and the son fused into one purpose. He became her medical advocate, sitting through oncology appointments, translating complex terminology, ensuring her wishes were heard. He also became her family. He moved her out of the rehab facility and into a small, sunlit apartment near the hospital, paid for by the church's benevolent fund. His parents, Joan and Mark, drove down to meet her. The meeting was achingly tender. They thanked her for the gift of their son. Elena, in turn, thanked them for giving him the life she couldn't. There were no rivals, only allies in a shared love for Daniel. The chemotherapy was brutal. Daniel adjusted his church schedule to be with her for every infusion. He read psalms to her as the drugs dripped into her veins. He learned to cook simple, bland meals she could keep down. In the quiet hours, they began to talk, not about the heavy past at first, but about small things. Her favorite color, yellow like sunflowers, his favorite book of the Bible, James, for its practicality. She told him about her love for old movie musicals. He dug out a portable DVD player, and they watched Singin' in the Rain together, her weak laughter at the comedy scenes the most beautiful sound he'd ever heard. One afternoon, as he was helping her tidy a drawer, he found a small, folded piece of paper at the bottom, beneath her scarves. It was a child's drawing, clearly very old, on crumbling construction paper. It depicted a stick-figure woman and a baby, with a giant, smiling sun above a square building. On the back, in a teenager's loopy script, it read, "For my baby, I love you, be happy." She had drawn it in the weeks after the surrender, a futile attempt to channel her grief. Daniel held it speechless. Elena looked at it, then at him. "I was going to leave that with you," she whispered, "that night, on the steps, but I was afraid it would get wet and ruin the bassinet, so I kept it. It was all I had of you for 22 years. That broken, beautiful artifact became the key that unlocked the rest. She told him about the terror of that winter, the shame, the isolation. She told him about the sound of the church bell ringing as she ran, a sound that echoed in her nightmares for years. He told her about his own childhood curiosities, the gentle way his parents had always honored her choice. He shared his own struggles, the pressure of his vocation, the loneliness that sometimes came with being a spiritual guide. They were no longer mythic figures to each other, the saintly birth mother, the perfect pastor-son. They were two flawed, wounded people, building a bridge across a chasm of lost time, one fragile conversation at a time. The cancer, in its terrible way, accelerated the intimacy. There was no time for pretense. One evening, after a particularly difficult day, Elena looked at him and asked the question that had haunted her. "Do you forgive me?" Daniel took a long moment. "There is nothing to forgive," he said finally, "but I can give you what you need to hear. Yes, Elena, I forgive you, completely, and I need you to forgive yourself." It was the release she had been seeking for 2 decades. She wept, not in agony, but in relief. The next Sunday, for the first time, she felt strong enough to attend his church service. She sat in the back row, wearing a soft hat to cover her hair loss. Daniel knew she was there, but he didn't acknowledge her from the pulpit. He preached on the story of the prodigal son, focusing not on the son's return, but on the father who spent every day watching the road, waiting to restore what was lost. Elena listened, her hand clutching the wooden cross he had given her, and she felt, for the first time, that she had come home. As her strength waned, Daniel made a decision. He wanted to give her a tangible piece of their connection, something that would outlast the disease. He contacted the county records office, and with Elena's consent and a judge's approval, due to the extraordinary circumstances, he petitioned to have his original birth certificate unsealed. The process was usually reserved for adult adoptees, but the terminal illness provided compassionate grounds. The day the official document arrived, he brought it to her. It was the same information as the photocopy, but now it was a legal record, with her name listed as mother and his original, unnamed entry as child. But there was a new, stunning detail. In the field for place of birth, it did not say unknown as he had always assumed. It listed a specific address, the old boarding house where Elena had lived as a teenager. She had not, in fact, given birth in a hospital or a car. She had delivered him, alone and terrified, in that rented room. The safe haven law had allowed her to report the birth after the fact, protecting her anonymity while ensuring he received a legal birth certificate. This meant his story began not on the church steps, but in the very room where she had loved and lost him. The symbol of abandonment was transformed into a story of immense, solitary courage. Elena traced the address with a trembling finger. "I wanted you to have a real place," she whispered, "even if it was just a room, a real beginning." Daniel had the document framed. He hung it in his office, next to a photo of his adoptive parents and a recent picture of him and Elena sitting in her apartment, smiling in the sunlight. It was a mosaic of his identity, complete at last. Elena passed away 8 months after her diagnosis, on a quiet spring morning with Daniel holding her hand. Her last words were not of regret, but of gratitude. "Thank you for finding me," she breathed, "my son." The funeral was held at St. Stephen's. Daniel presided. He spoke not of tragedy, but of redemption. He spoke of a love that endures all silence, all distance, all time. He shared the story of the drawing, of the birth certificate, of the yellow sunflowers he now planted in his garden every year in her memory. The church was full. His congregation, his parents, social workers from the rehab center, even a few reporters who had caught wind of the extraordinary story. In the weeks that followed, Daniel experienced a profound shift in his ministry. His preaching gained a new depth, a resonance born of lived pain and grace. He became a vocal advocate for reforming safe haven laws to include provisions for voluntary contact registries, where both parents and adult children could connect if both parties consented. He started a support group for adoptees and birth parents navigating reunion, a space for the complex emotions he now understood in his bones. The final surprise came in the form of a letter delivered to the church months after Elena's death. It was from the county regarding the old boarding house address on the birth certificate. The building, long dilapidated, had been purchased by a non-profit. In the process of renovation, workers found a small metal box hidden in the wall of what had been Elena's room. Inside was a teenaged Elena's few treasures: a dried sunflower, a ticket stub from a movie, and a handwritten letter addressed to "my child." In it, she poured out her hopes for him, her love, her aching apology, and her prayer that he would find a happiness she couldn't provide. She had sealed it and hidden it in the wall the day before she left for the church, a secret time capsule of her heart. The non-profit, knowing the story from the local news, sent it to Daniel. He read it alone in his office, weeping. It was the missing piece, the voice of the 17-year-old girl forever preserved. He had her courage in the legal document, her love in the child's drawing, and now her youthful voice in this letter. The narrative was complete. The mother who had been a ghost was now a fully realized person in his history, with fears, dreams, and a love that had never wavered. Daniel's story did not end with a neat replacement of one family for another. It was an expansion of the heart. He still visited his parents every Sunday for dinner. He still led his flock at St. Stephen's. But now, he carried within him the peace of a question answered, a wound acknowledged and healed, and the unshakable knowledge that grace often appears not in the form we expect, but in the form we desperately need. He had learned that redemption is not about erasing the past, but about integrating it, about making the broken places the source of our deepest strength and compassion. And as he stood in the doorway of his church, welcoming the next lost soul, he did so with the quiet certainty of a man who had been found in the most miraculous way possible. The story of Elena and Daniel is more than a dramatic coincidence. It is a map of the human heart, charting the territories of guilt, grace, and the relentless search for wholeness. It asks us a difficult question: what do we owe to the ghosts of our past, and what can they give us in return? Safe haven laws exist for a brutal, necessary reason: to prevent desperate acts from becoming tragedies. They are a societal promise of no questions asked, a clean break. But the human soul does not deal in clean breaks. Elena's journey shows us that the legal absolution of a safe haven surrender does not erase the psychological and spiritual consequence. The law saved a life, but it could not save a mother from the lifelong penance of her own memory. Her return to that church was not a search for her son, but a search for redemption from the place where she believed she had lost it. Daniel's path reveals the other side of that same coin. The adoptee's narrative of being chosen is a beautiful and powerful one, but it can sometimes wall off the natural, quiet curiosity about origins. His story teaches us that answering the question, "Where do I come from?" does not diminish the love of the family that raised you. It completes the picture of the person you are. His faith was not shattered by the complicated truth, but deepened by it, proving that real faith has room for messy, human stories. Their reunion, forged in crisis and sealed in terminal illness, defies the fairy tale ending. There was no decades-long relationship to rebuild, no family holidays to share. Instead, they were given a finite, precious window to exchange the most essential currencies: forgiveness, recognition, and peace. In that way, their story is perhaps more universally true than a simple happy ending. It speaks to the urgency of reconciliation, to to the idea that it is never too late to offer or accept an olive branch, even if that branch is grasped in a hospital room. There are over 4,600 documented safe haven Barbies in the United States, each with a story that began with a crisis and a courageous, painful choice. For everyone, there is a mother or father who carries a secret. For everyone, there is a child who may wonder. The system is designed to keep those paths separate forever. But the story of Elena and Daniel whispers a provocative truth, that the threads of our lives, even those we think are severed, may have a gravity of their own, pulling us back toward the people we need to heal and who need to heal us. It reminds us that the miracles we pray for rarely look like what we imagine. They look like a tired woman on church steps. They look like a young pastor extending a hand, unaware he is reaching into his own history. They look like the brutal honesty of a diagnosis that forces us to say what matters. They are quiet, personal, and often disguised as our deepest trials. If this story has moved you, consider what unfinished business your own heart might be carrying. Whose forgiveness do you need to seek or to grant? What lost thread have you been too afraid to pick up? Share this story with someone who might need to hear its message of relentless hope. And if you want to join us for more journeys into the extraordinary resilience of the human spirit, subscribe and click the notification bell. Your support helps us find and tell these vital stories. Until next time, remember, no one is ever too lost to be found.